This week, we update you on an alleged paedophile featured in one of our previous stories. But first, we look at the state of our electricity supply. We ask, what's gone wrong and what can we look forward to this winter?
We take electricity for granted. But without it, the country's economy would come to a standstill. Power is an essential element for economic development. People in the Western Cape recently had a taste of life without power. In November 2005 alone, Cape Town had no less than 3 major power outages. There were more in store, as the Cape was gearing up for the holiday season. Last winter, areas of Johannesburg also experienced outages, but they were less frequent than in Cape Town and did not last as long. The Western Cape has seen further outages this year. Many were furious, and experts started questioning, not for the first time, whether strategic decisions had been bungled. The country had been rudely awakened from a contented slumber.
It was just an enormous mess with enormous financial consequences.
When it hit us during the day when we were trying to do lectures, and it's the second or third time in a few weeks, then you realize that there are some serious problems underlying this circumstance.
It caused chaos in our workshops. In my workshop, there was no warning from the electricity department or ESKOM as such that there's going to be cut-offs.
We discovered there's a much greater problem in the future that needs to be the subject of a deepening conversation.
In Cape Town, people were angry, and the more outages there were, the angrier they got. Strangely, the experts didn't seem surprised.
For several years, people have been saying that we're going to run out of electricity.
In the year 2000, government was given a report that clearly indicated that unless it would increase capacity in electricity generation, we would be running out of electricity at peak periods in the year 2006.
So what happened in the Western Cape? And what can South Africa expect this winter? The country has the capacity to produce around 38,000 megawatts. The anticipated peak demand in winter, when most electricity is used, is around 36,000 megawatts. This leaves a reserve of just over 3%. Some argue that this is where the problem lies.
Well, the big problem was that the gap between electricity generation and supply and between the demand was closing rapidly. So there was not enough energy available for the Western Cape in the short-term future.
Whereas we should have a reserve margin of about 15%, that is less than 3%. That means if you have any failures on the grid, if power stations are down for maintenance, we're going to have to cut people off. They're going to be blackouts.
In short, South Africa has simply been cutting it too fine. Most of the outages took place in the Western Cape. It's serviced by this nuclear power station, Koeberg, and by stations in the north of the country, in Mpumalanga. Transmission lines then carry power down south. Koeberg has 2 units. They function independently and have to, from time to time, be shut down for refueling. When one of these units is closed down for whatever reason, extra power is fed via the transmission lines. If there's a problem along the way, it's lights out in the Cape. And this is what happened a day before Christmas last year. After a refueling outage, one of the Koeberg units suddenly went down. A foreign object was discovered in the rotor, the infamous 8-centimeter bolt. If ESKOM's transmission lines had been up to the task of carrying the extra electricity, then the Western Cape would not have felt a thing. But they were not.
Western Cape is a particular problem because Most of our stations, 92% of our generation capacity is from the coal stations in Mpumalanga. They have to be there because that is where the coal is. You have to build these big coal stations on the coal fields, and that's all up in the northeast of the country. So the west of the country has only got one power station, which is Koeberg, which produces, its maximum capacity is 1,800 megawatts. The west of the country needs 4,000 or 5,000 megawatts. So Koeberg can't manage on its own.
For several years we've been hearing about the expansion of the transmission network to the Western Cape, and it's not been built yet. So ultimately we knew something somewhere was going to crack.
As a result, the Western Cape has been put on a knife edge.
You know, business at the moment is very, very angry. They are seriously looking at getting compensation from ESKOM.
Leonard Smith's panel beating operation is just one of the small businesses that suffered from these outages. He too is furious. Many 24-hour operations were hit hard, like bakeries and plastic molders. The outages simply took place without warning. Experts still disagree about the cost to business and to the general economy.
It is a daily fight for us to get work into our workshops. It is really, there is such blatant discrimination, economic discrimination, racial discrimination by insurance companies. At that stage, we had a little bit of work in here that we could do for certain insurers that do not discriminate. And here we have these electrical blackouts. I mean, that was like adding salt to injury.
The returns that we got were companies that already collectively had lost some 59 million rand, and that is out of 200. Now, if we extrapolate that to the membership of the chamber, we start looking at a loss to those businesses in the vicinity of about 3 billion rand.
Koeberg at the moment is running on one unit, while the damaged rotor of the second unit is being replaced. It's going to be a delicate balancing act for some time to come. The working unit will have to be shut down for a scheduled refueling as soon as the other one is ready, leaving the province vulnerable and praying nothing major happens.
I was meant to be on a British Airways flight on Wednesday. They'd overbooked. They didn't have the capacity. They just dropped their passengers. There's impact because those people didn't get to meetings, they missed connecting flights and things like that. Electricity is just the same. They will drop industries, they will miss their exports, they will make losses or certainly not make the profit that they expected to make. There's a knock-on effect throughout the economy.
After the break, are we heading for a crisis?
Some argue that what happened in the Western Cape was a worst-case scenario. Everything that could go wrong did, all at the same time. Others say the outages could have been avoided, that the signs were there for all to see. Clearly, though, the flurry of activities suggests ESKOM was caught by surprise, and the outages reveal underlying problems in our national power grid. These are the power lines that the Western Cape will have to partially rely on this winter. One of the previous outages took place when these lines couldn't cope with the amount of power being pumped down from the north. ESKOM is now making sure they are in the best possible shape. We joined the group assembled to work on this delicate task. The equipment here has to be clean to ensure safety.
Baggersmillersvlei, 400 kV-lyn. Kleur is 2,8 meter. Moenie rondloop op die toring, losloop nie. Daar waar jy werk, maak vas. Ja, ons is een span wat die tipe werk doen hier in die Kaap. En dan het hulle span by Simmerpan en Natal en by Witbank. So ons het al die mense laat kom hier na die Kaap toe om ons te kom help hierso. So hier is 'n totaal van 36 mense en ons het 3 helikopters wat besig is op die lyne om hierdie isolators te vervang my krag weer reg te kry.
This is dangerous work, and mistakes can mean death. These high-voltage wires are live. There are now calls to rethink our national power supply, and many theories about what's led to this state of affairs.
The problem is we haven't got enough power stations. That's the problem. We have not got enough power stations, and our transmission grid is inadequate for the present demand. It's as simple as that.
ESKOM was banned from building power stations. ESKOM was told, for example, by the regulator at the beginning of 1994, that they couldn't have the tariff increase they asked for because they would not be building the next power station.
And it's a problem that we've seen coming 10 years ago. We saw this problem coming very, very clearly. You could see then with existing capacity and with steadily rising demand, which was absolutely predictable, that we would run out of electricity by about now, and we've done so.
So the information was there, but those with the power to do something with it weren't understanding the implications. I think it's as simple as that.
This is what actually happened. We have Koeberg out, but scheduled refueling. If you have another problem on top of that, then you go into load shedding. Now, that is the planning criteria that we use. So obviously, you cannot plan a system that has infinite capacity that can handle any contingency, because then the customer has to pay for it.
Labor unions from the left and the right add another dimension to this debate.
We want to understand this whole problems that we experience in the electricity supplies around the lack of focus on skills development in the country. That's generally the situation, and it relates to the exit, forced exit of skilled people out of our energy supplier, in this case ESKOM, with the experience that the company has lost over the years, and that skills is completely lost to the company.
They're chasing the affirmative action targets, and sometimes when the job must be done, they overload other employees with work, and that it becomes a problem. We address that issues, and it is sort of, they actually ignore us. And now there's a crisis, they come to us and say, listen, you must help us with skills, bringing back the people.
We ask our key customers in terms of how reliably we've been providing power and how economically we've been providing power. There will be clear indication that we've been doing very well. We've had technical problems in the Western Cape. That has not been the trend, and that is not going to be the trend.
So far, no one has taken the blame for the situation we're in. Government and ESKOM don't seem to see anything amiss as others do.
COSATU is really concerned about the way we're managing the crisis, because if any other worker had overseen such a problem of non-performance, he would have been disciplined. Here we're not even admitting there's a problem, we're not putting in place remedial steps, we're not having an outside investigation to objectively tell us what the circumstances is. Instead, what's happening is it appears to be a cover-up. We've got to be open, upfront, frank and honest with the society if we want them to support the measures that are going to be required to make sure we make it through the next few months around the electricity supply and the demand that clearly exceeds that.
I think we've shared what happened. Those incidences that are subject to other processes of investigation, once those are concluded, I'm sure they will be made public.
Recently, the media has been awash with warnings. Critics say the state of our electricity supply threatens the growth rate the country so desperately needs. It's been rumored that an aluminium smelter destined for Kucha has already been put on hold. Smelters guzzle power, and the investors are said to be wary of a country with unreliable power supplies.
There are very few countries in the world today that are negotiating with an aluminium smelter. Some countries do not negotiate on any grounds for aluminium smelters. Now, we're in negotiations with Alcan. Those negotiations are going well. We would not do that if we were not confident that we could supply the electricity. But when other people come along and say, oh, well, they might have invested in South Africa if we'd had energy, really that's a somewhat flippant claim, because if I want to get an aluminium smelter into a country, it doesn't matter where, it can be Russia or China, I start talking to the government and the electricity suppliers well in advance.
We need an extra 2,100 megawatts every year. Now, ESKOM's plans for next year are about extra 1,500. Beyond that, there's going to be a long time before any power stations come online, because it takes a long time to build them. So we're in a crisis now, and we're heading deeper into one if the 6% growth happens. And we want it to happen. It's a good thing that it happens.
Last winter, some parts of Johannesburg had outages that put businesses out of action and plunged homes into darkness. The city's aging power infrastructure was blamed. City Power says it's now on top of the problem, but the threat of outages frightens some.
We are a little bit concerned, obviously with the reports from Cape Town, with the power outages and that. This area here, it has been known for a lot of power outages in the winter. If we had a power outage while our products were in the oven, that would actually spoil the product, all depending on how long the power outage would be for. If it was for a couple of minutes or so, we wouldn't really have a problem. But if it was for, let's say, a longer period, like half an hour or more, all our products that were in the oven we would have to throw out.
Between now and end of July, yes, we are at a risk period. And we are focusing on making sure that the problems that we can actually isolate can be isolated. And we have a fairly robust plan to deal with that.
As the President said in Parliament this afternoon, why are we spending so much time scaring ourselves when there's no need to be scared?
Anybody who tells me we shouldn't worry makes me worry. It's like, you can't miss it. You will.
So will this be a cozy winter for those who can afford it? Or are we heading for a winter of discontent? It could go either way.
After the break, an update on one of our previous stories.